think we could go ahead and start the recording. So I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, so we are calling the Legal and Justice Systems Committee of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force to order. It is 11:35 on July 8th of 2025. Welcome everybody. One of the topics that has been brought up several times is driving license suspended in the third degree, diversion options, and warrant data. So I know that this is a heavily discussed topic. There's been some individuals that have said, you know, should this actually be a criminal charge? Should it be a civil infraction? How should it proceed because it clogs up the jails? I think that we have several individuals that could speak on behalf on the defense and on behalf of the jail on how that impacts both areas. I can tell you for the past several years, without seeing Eric here, I don't believe that the county has been prosecuting too many of the DWS thirds, but I can say that municipalities and district courts under the county, but municipalities have been proceeding with prosecution of DWS thirds. I'm going to see if Wendy or Caleb want to jump in on what they see the impacts on the jail. I kind of think it's decreased over time because of jail restrictions, but with the jail restrictions being lifted, that may have changed some. And we can talk to Jake about warrants in the near future. Caleb or Wendy, do you love it when I put you on the spot? Caleb.
I don't have any actual data, so I am guessing, but I believe that since booking restrictions have been modified in early February, we have booked more DWS thirds than we have for years because we had not booked them at all for years and years and years. My guess, without looking at the facts, and I will look for a nod from Maya, is most of those are warrants. So that's my guess, but I believe that it's been an increase.
Maya.
Well, I don't practice in district court, so I surveyed our district court attorneys and got some responses to share. DWS third is charged. One attorney says it's charged a lot, but standalone DWS thirds are generally dismissed at arraignment, but they hold on to them if there's anything attached, anything at all. You know, these are generally folks, I think we all know, like it's just, they end up owing money and then owing more money, and it just kind of snowballs, and we're just digging deeper financial holes for folks with the prosecution of the DWS thirds. It was noted that there's a lot of charges. There'll be an infraction of some kind, and then it'll be discovered that there's a no-vol or failure to transfer title. And both of those are arrestable offenses. And so they're seeing a lot of people getting arrested on those matters and spending time in the jail. So I guess like question for, oh, here's Eric. Hi, Eric. You know, I would imagine that has an impact on the jail. I'm sure that I'd like the prosecutor to look at and consider I don't know, you know, or maybe we want to look at booking restrictions, but it's like, we're literally jailing people for failure to transfer title. Like, is that what we should be doing? And no vols. So like if they had a speeding infraction or some kind of traffic violation that normally they would just get a citation and be released, if they failed to transfer the title, then it results in arrest. So the DWS thirds are used as bargaining chips in negotiations, you know, plead, you know, so they're definitely being charged. And people end up in custody for those offenses, yes.
And I agree with you, Maya. I think, you know, like law enforcement has all of the people that are out there and they have all the laws that they're supposed to, you know, look at to enforce. And I think, you know, when they have somebody that's driving without a license and no registration and possibly ignition interlock, they're going to charge it. What the prosecutors do with it is a secondary option. And I see Wendy's hand up here, so I'm gonna go to Wendy and then maybe we can circle back to Eric to see if he has any input on DWS thirds.
Part of this is a little bit of history and something that maybe we can look at in the future. The folks who worked over at the minimum security jail, the work center, I knew going into retirement, your brain starts getting
Good
fuzzy.
for you. That's all I'm gonna say.
But one of the things that we did very unofficially, and the deputies who were working over there started working with the guys who were coming in, scheduling jail time and that kind of thing, but then also say, well, here's some steps. We want you to do is you go to to go get a copy of why it is that you've got a restricted or revoked driver's license and you're driving anyway. And so they'd sit down with the guy that usually guys would bring the readout, and then sit down with the deputy and then start creating a plan about how they can take care of all of these suspendeds that are floating around. And it actually, for anybody who had even a little bit of desire not to keep coming to jail for that kind of thing, it worked really well. And whether that's something that, I don't know what staffing level is right now over at the work center, because I promised Caleb I'd keep my fingers out of, running the jail, since I'm not the jail chief anymore. So I don't know what staffing level is right now, but it may be something as one of those steps that we can take as a committee to reduce the booking restrictions, or to reduce the number of people that are coming into jail, because we would have offenders come down to the work center and show the deputies that they had gotten a driver's license. And some of them, it took quite a while to work through, and the deputies, because they work with the systems all the time, are able to say, well, to also talk to your public defender, here might be some options, if they've got 14 of these, could they get these dismissed and instead focus on, say, these 3, get those fines paid, get that taken care of, and then they would be legal driving. And if they needed help, the deputies would help steer them in ways that they could go get. Some of the guys don't read and write very well, and they're afraid to take the driving test again. And so there were things below the surface of that. The other thing that used to, and I'm assuming still does, help at the jail, is, especially if someone's in on a felony charge, they just wrap the suspended in with whatever the time in jail is going to be on the felony charge, and make it go away. But also then, depending on where they're going, that if we can get that program set up again where somebody can work with the offenders, because it was very it wasn't a systemic program, or it was just very informal, but it worked really well. So it's something to consider, I think, for the committee, and we can make it a program, I guess, but we're going to have staffing. And to tell you the truth, I'm quite worried about funding coming down to law enforcement and criminal justice because of the spending bill that got signed last week, so, but good and bad, but it is something that worked. And a big part of it was, I'll give credit where credit's due, is the deputies that were working over at the work center, so.
Thank you, Wendy, and, Stephen Coughlin.
Raylene, you wanted to hear from Eric first. I was just trying to get in line, so if Eric has anything to say at this point, I'm glad to defer to him.
Eric?
So I stepped in late. I've been doing a defense interview. I don't know, what's the question? What's going on?
I just want to interject really quick just to say, Eric, I don't know if you heard all of what I said, but I did
No.
acknowledge that the DWS thirds that are being charged standalone are being dismissed generally at arraignment.
Okay.
It's the ones that are combined with other offenses. Also, no vols and failure to transfer title, those are getting charged and then resulting in arrest, which means we've got people sitting in jail on failure to transfer title and an infraction, no vol and an infraction, DWS third and an infraction.
Right.
And those, I think that's the body that we're concerned with. Thank you.
All right. All right. So this is something that you brought to us, and you're suggesting that no, somebody else brought this to us and saying that we shouldn't do it. I'll agree that we shouldn't be doing this. I'll just say that this, failure to transfer title. I brought this up with the people down in district court and asked, is this happening? Do we have these charges? How many? And I've been told that we don't have many, and I'm like, well, but we shouldn't have any. And so we're talking about dealing with those things the same way that we deal with DWS threes. They shouldn't be coming in unless we have a traffic safety issue, and I don't know how failure to transfer title ever comes into that. No vol, that's lower than DWS 3. I don't know how those are getting charged, and although I'll say something, these things come in charged by agencies. They come in direct file by agencies, and then we have to address them. And do we have anybody from district court on this meeting? Anybody? Raylene's nodding. I'm wondering if we can stop WSP from doing that. It feels like they should come to us first so we can screen them before they get direct filed. I know that happens in a lot of counties, and I don't know, how to. It feels like we should put a stop to that. I don't know if I'm the person to do that, or if there's another that should. But we need to have some sort of evaluation first.
That's a great ask. I just want to say that when it's failure to transfer title and what you're calling a traffic safety issue, like speeding, they're not just standalone. So
No,
like
I
they
know.
are
Listen,
associated with something, but it's like, it's still.
Maya, stop arguing. Stop arguing. I don't like the charge failure to transfer title. I think it's stupid. I don't know why we're dealing with that. I asked, how many of these are we getting? I was told almost nothing. It's like, well, okay. Is it something we needed to deal with? But if that's happening a bunch, we got to put a stop to that.
Yeah, maybe Caleb can generate a report of how many people are booked on.
I can get a report of that. I asked anecdotally, and that probably wasn't the right way of doing it. I need to get a report done by our administrator. And hopefully, let's make something happen. And I'm sorry, Stephen, for jumping in on you.
No problem, Eric.
That's all right. Jake, did you want to follow up to that?
You got me thinking, Eric. I don't have an answer for that. I do know State Patrol electronically files those via sector, and then they show up, and then we process them. So something I could look into, but I don't have an answer today.
Jake, I don't know if it's you that allows it or me that allows it, but somehow, I know other counties don't do it.
Sure.
It seems like there should be some sort of review before.
Okay, sounds good. See what I can see.
Stephen.
Well, I'll just trail along on the line of argumentation that seems to be here. There needs to be sort of a systemic solution to this. What Wendy described at the work center is effective, but it's a lot of work. and it, you know, and it doesn't solve everything. Northwest Justice Project back in the end of my day had a whole driver's relicensing project. I don't know if that's still in place or not, but it was a lot of work. And we shouldn't have to go through that person by person lot of work to take care of something that is economic or literacy related, or, you know, all of these root causes that we're trying to divert away from and not incarcerate people over. So I'm completely with Eric and Maya, and if you guys can find a leverage point to solve the real problem, I'm all for that.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to agree to disagree on some of these topics because I see things from a different angle, I think. The Northwest Justice Project, just to touch on that first, Stephen. Jill Bernstein was instrumental in getting that set up years ago. And there was concerns because we were getting motions and orders done by non-attorneys on stuff that were convictions and on DWS thirds, and that was coming to the municipal courts. So we would reach back out to Jill because she was trying to set this up, and then she would work with the Northwest Justice Project. So there was a lot of different issues when that was being done. I can tell you since that and after that was kind of defunct, that there was the ability for the clerks in the municipal and district courts to be able to provide abstract driving records to individuals that came into court that were suspended, so they could see what was suspending them and to be able to contact those courts. The laws have changed 3 times since I started in criminal justice on DWS thirds and how those occur. And I think I spoke at one of the other meetings. And now when you have a citation for speeding, so it used to be you would get suspended if you didn't pay a moving or non-moving violation. I think that changed about 2012. Jake might be able to correct me on that. But then they changed it so you could only be suspended in the 3rd degree for non-moving violations. I mean, not non-moving, sorry, moving violations. So speeding, failure to stop at a stop sign, something that was a little more dangerous than trying to renew your tabs. Okay. So those are the ones that are now suspending you. And then about 3 years ago, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but the citations changed. Infractions changed on moving violations and non-moving violations, and all the courts had to change their forms if they had hard copy citations or if they were using e-filing, and those forms now have 4 options instead of 3 options. The 4th option is I can't afford to pay this citation, and you send that to the court. Used to be you had to respond within 15 days. Now you have actually 30 days. A lot of the courts were waiting 45 days because if you have people from out of state or out of country, sometimes it was postmarked within that time frame before they would actually FTA and then notify the Department of Licensing. So typically, if somebody failed to respond, you gave them that 45 or 30-day window, then they would be notified by the court that they could be suspended. That would go to the Department of Licensing. Now the Department of Licensing also has to send notification to the driver that their driving privilege could be potentially suspended. So it's about a 90-day window before something happens. And a lot of these people are already suspended, but that was all wiped away when there was, oh, I'm trying to remember the law. I'm sure Maya and Eric can tell me what it is. But there was a law that changed Thurston versus something, the Department of Licensing, maybe, that said that they had to notify the driver, and it wiped out all of the people that were suspended. So when I was at Blaine, the current administrator, she goes, Raylene, so what's this going to do? And I said, well, about 1.5 years is going to go by. Once this goes into effect, we're going to see people that were suspended in the past suspended again. That's what happened in Redmond versus Moore. It seemed like a recycling thing. did contact one of the prosecutors. I asked him if he would be able to attend today's meeting. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to. But he says, you know, I would love to see them decriminalize DWS thirds and change it to criminalizing to driving without insurance. That's a legislative change. I don't have any stake in that, but he says, you know, it's the victims. It's the victims that are in an accident with somebody that didn't have a license, that doesn't have insurance, and even my uninsured motorist couldn't cover all of this stuff because of somebody that was unlicensed and uninsured, and somebody loses their job and they have all these medical bills, and it's the victims that are really impacted by individuals that are driving without a license. Yes, it clogs up the jails, but we also have to think about everybody involved. So I have a little bit of a different aspect on it, and I do see that there are individuals that probably shouldn't necessarily be in jail for a driving license suspended in the 3rd degree, but there needs to be some type of deterrent to protect others. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, Raylene, I'm way behind on all the changes in the laws, so I have to accept your chronology of that as is. All I want to say for accuracy's sake is Jill Bernstein never worked for Northwest Justice Project. She started that when she temporarily chaired Law Advocates. That didn't work. And then NJP statewide took over the driver's relicensing, and that was a more organized process. Obviously, they didn't have the capacity to keep that up, but those early glitches, I think, came from trying to use volunteer lawyers.
Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts on this before we move forward? Other than trying to get some more data and statistics.
Raylene, I'll just hop in there real quick. I will see, I know the city of Bellingham with their community court is trying to tackle this with their charges as well. And most of those referrals are suspended license charges where they are put on the community court with supervision with us. And we work together and relicensing them and contacting the courts and doing those. So that just might be another resource. Andrew Mitchell with the city of Bellingham. So.
That's great, Jake. Maybe we can look at some data and a presentation from Mr. Mitchell in the future to discuss this topic further. So thanks a lot, Jake. Moving on to warrant data, we provided some more information. I think Jake has some warrant data from District Court. District and Bellingham are probably the biggest contributors to warrants because they have more population and more cases. So can you share some of that with us, Jake?
So just to clarify, I wasn't 100% sure. I got a lot of warrant information. I guess I'm looking for what is needed, like what specifics is needed. I have a huge spreadsheet and I just need to know what is desired, and I can kind of whittle that down, filter it out, and be able to maybe provide that here shortly. But is it just for the suspended thirds? And are we looking for demographics, or what was?
I think there was a couple different discussions on warrants, and one of them was for suspended thirds, and I think that's kind of what we're focusing on right now. So if you want to share that, and then I know Peter Frazier and Heather were wanting to know a little bit more on some of the other warrants, and because Tammy is out of town and wasn't able to provide me some of the statistics from Bellingham yet, if you could share the DWS third portion of it, and then we can move forward and address some of the other questions on warrants later.
Okay, again, I have it. I haven't set the filters for it, so I don't know that I'm really prepared.
We can table it and go to the next. I'm totally
that would be
fine with
appreciated.
that.
Then now that I know, I can kind of funnel it down and then provide that and send it out. So
great, I appreciate that, Jake. So diversion options was one of the other things, and I think that was kind of focused on DWS thirds. I know that is something that is dear to the heart of the task force on other diversion programs that we can put into effect. One of the stop gaps for some of the diversion programs is funding for housing. And I know the exec's office was working on a grant when that application comes out so that they can look at that. But I am going to just kind of plant a seed for Maya and Eric and anybody else that has any other diversion programs, one that are currently existing and others that we can look at moving forward, to see if we have any other options on keeping people out of jail as available. Any comments on that? Okay. So then I don't have Judge Jones here, and I can tell you, we have crazy calendars, and but Stephanie Kraft is here. The pretrial service groups had a subcommittee, and they were meeting, and then we would ask them to report. And it seemed like it would be better to defunct the pretrial services subcommittee from meeting on a regular basis to just have a time slot in the Legal and Justice Committee that they could report on any new updates or changes that needed to be addressed or advise the steering committee. Stephanie, if you have anything to report, would you like to speak now?
Thank you, Raylene. I don't have anything additional to add. I think that we were looking for a way to continue to provide information and engage, but also to really look at efficiencies with meetings and the time for people to be able to complete work throughout the day.
Thank you, Stephanie. So then we're going to move to other business. And I have two things on the agenda. Thank you, Bertie, for adding something to it. And the one item is Miss Wendy Jones and I recently had a conversation. As many of you have known that I have been looking to find somebody to help me co-chair or chair some of the legal and justice committees, because I've got a few meetings that sometimes conflict and it's hard to be in two places at once. So I have reached out to Wendy Jones. I think Peter Fraser also contacted her on possibility of asking her to assist us with co-chairing the Legal and Justice Committee. So with that being said, Wendy said, I think I can do that. We have to meet and go over some of the dynamics, but I'm going to turn it over to Wendy briefly to say thank you. And do you have any other comments? And Jill has, because I think we might have to do some vote or something, maybe.
Yes, that's exactly it. Traditionally, chairs are voted in.
And I had unmuted to move that we approve Wendy as the co-chair of the committee.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Bertie. With that being said, if you can all, is there any discussion? Yay, hearing none. Please raise your virtual hands if you are in favor. Okay, and I'm hoping Wendy's still in favor, and I'm going to lower my hand. And then is there any opposed? Okay, Jill, I think we have a unanimous vote.
I did not see votes from Wendy or Eric.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess, yes, that would be fine for me.
And just for the record, I'm voting for the sheriff.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate that. I would love to have the sheriff as a co-chair, but I was advised. Oh, you're voting for the sheriff, not
Yeah,
voting.
I meant just
Never
in
mind.
a form and
Disregard.
fashion thing. As a note, I'm not a voting member. I'm voting as proxy.
I've had too many meetings today. I'm so sorry. I appreciate that. So are we unanimous then, with the exception of Eric, who might have disappeared on us?
Yes.
Perfect. All right.
Well,
Thank you,
I'd
Wendy.
say thank you and give you a whole speech, but I know the big part of it is that y'all are really, really busy and you're going, thank God they found somebody who said yes. But I will do my best. And Raylene and I are meeting Thursday. She can kind of give me some of the logistics and bring me up to speed. So thank you very much.
We say back, thank God it was you, Wendy.
You say that now, just wait. Who knows?
Uh,
It's time for me to start just kind of getting involved in some things again. It seems to have gone, everything seems to be starting to happen at once, which is also fine because it'll keep me out of other people's hair. So I'll tell them it's all because of y'all. So
Well, thank you, Wendy, again, and I really appreciate it. And it's not just to find somebody, it's to find somebody that has historical knowledge throughout the criminal justice system that's very competent and is not afraid to speak up and tell us how things work and what we need or we don't need. So I really do truly appreciate you stepping up and saying that you're willing to assist us in this task. So thanks again, Wendy. Okay, so the next item on the other business portion of the agenda is the information that Bertie and Dean shared with us from Village Reach. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. I think this is it. And share. Okay, can you all see my screen, and do I have the correct document?
I would, Dean, do you want to take the lead or do you want me to on this? He's probably unmuting. I was thinking that maybe since people haven't seen either, if we put up the recommendations of the Village Reach proposal, and then Dean and I can verbally describe what the data subgroup has recommended. So while, because this is the data subgroup's recommendations, so I think Jill has the recommendations, if it's not easy for you to find, Raylene, that are the last 3 pages of Village Reach's 39-page report.
And I have that up on my screen if you'd like me to share my screen, if that's possible.
So Dean,
Okay,
would you
I
like
just
to
stopped
take the
sharing.
lead, or would you like me to start setting the stage?
I'm happy to have you do it. I'm just saying I can actually share my screen that has the.
Excellent, excellent. Well, while you're
Perfect.
doing that, I will just set the stage for everybody. The Village Reach, as most of you know, was the consultant that was hired for 6 months by the executive department through the public health department to develop a performance measurement plan for the justice implementation plan. And the 6 months ended on June 30th, and Julia Garrett was the assigned person. And just very briefly, she really did a very good job working with J-POP and meeting with a lot of key players in our community, and worked with the data index committee, etc., and developed with multiple iterations in the affected committees a very thorough 39-page report of recommended measures and a spreadsheet of those recommended measures, what we can actually measure now and those areas that we can't, in some detail. And then at the request of those who contracted with her, she was also added to make recommendations on next steps to get from where we are to where we will need to be. And this report came out last week on June 30th. And so there is a data work group, as many of you may remember, that was formed jointly by this subcommittee and by Behavioral Health Subcommittee at their joint meeting. And that includes Dean and myself and Wendy on this meeting, and then Cedric Anderson, who is a member of the IPRTF and Behavioral Health Committee, and Amy Hockenberry, who was previously at the Health Department and now has another job but remains very interested in this. So we had a meeting Thursday, the 3rd, right after we got this report. And we felt that timing is important and that we saw our role as being proactive in being supportive of those recommendations and distilling perhaps another layer of what we would advise. And in a perfect world, we would have sent all this out ahead of time and given all of you time to read it and digest it. But unfortunately, this is the last meeting of this committee before the last meeting of the IPRTF this summer. And we thought it would be prudent, if possible, not to wait till the end of September. So that is why this is landing on you. And so what Dean has put up is the recommendations from Village Reach. And Dean, do you want to take it from here or
Sure.
it's up to you? Okay.
Sure. So first of all, Raylene, I did send to you, as well as many other people, the actual final report. And I thought I would leave it to you and or Jill, excuse me, to determine how you wanted to distribute that report to the members of the committee or the IPRTF. There's a lot in there, and it represents a very comprehensive framework for looking at evaluation at all levels of both the individual projects and the processes, process measures necessary to make sure we're on track with those projects, but also some systems level and program level measures that were recommended by her. And then some discussion about population level measures. All of that, she's indicating in these recommendations, depends upon there being attention by the county to developing the staffing resource and infrastructure necessary to turn those proposed measures into actual information and data that can be reported in various ways, including what's been talked about a lot, the notion of a dashboard of the various important indicators of how well we're doing in our systems. So she has two sets of recommendations. As you can see in the shared page, the first set is near term within the next 6 to 12 months, and there are 4 in that category. And then the next section is longer term, 12, to 36 months, which is probably as long out as we can think about operationalizing things to do. Of those 4 in the near term, the first one is what you see here as designate a dedicated role to operationalization of this plan. And her basic point is that, as we all know from having discussed over the years, the various kinds of data that we would like to have and the various sources from which those data would need to come across agencies, across departments, parts of the court, agencies in the community, that it requires some attention to organizing all of that into an ongoing process. And so the notion is that will not happen if we're trying to get that done by basically borrowing bits and pieces of time from the various staff in the county and elsewhere to somehow make that happen. That it needs a dedicated role that coordinates and operationalizes that plan. And as the language here indicates, let me scroll up a bit. That the work involves continuous coordination across policy leaders, agency operations, IT and data systems managers, legal experts, frontline program staff. And it demands the building of linked data systems, cross-agency data sharing agreements, and performance reporting infrastructure. that amounts to really managing an overall complex project and also developing relationships to make that possible. That's the first one, and it's sort of the one on which many of the other recommendations depend. It's a prerequisite, so to speak. And just quickly, the second one is then working on establishing shared indicator definitions. That's, for example, the whole question of what do we mean by recidivism, and that draws on much of the report's discussion as well. The third one is to then conduct a next generation sequential intercept model mapping workshop. You may be familiar that the SIM construct was used in the initial needs assessment process leading up to the JPIP to sort of frame out the various intercept points in a person's contact with the legal and justice system where a diversion from that process could occur. And so she's recommending that there be some additional work done on that. And by the way, the state administrative office of the courts has offered to be a resource in conducting such a workshop. And then finally, to begin to operationalize some of the early reporting opportunities that we may have just with the data that we currently have. So that's the background for the recommendation then that the data work group has developed, which is what you put up first of all, Raylene. And I'll stop sharing and you can, first of all, are there questions about what I've quickly tried to summarize?
I don't see any hands, Steve, so we must have done a great job.
Okay, I'll stop sharing here.
What I heard you say in the very beginning, Dean, was that we need to be able to share this among the members before the next meeting, and this was the last opportunity to do that. Correct on that?
Right.
So I want to make sure that we get that distributed. I'm sure that Jill can, if she hasn't already, to all of the members. But I see Maya's hand up, so I'm going to circle there.
Great. Thanks, Dean. That was helpful. And is the responsibility with Village Reach to coordinate action on those 4 points, or like where does the responsibility fall and who's?
It falls to the county in general.
So.
In other words, the Village Reach contract is completed. I'm sorry.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said that
Village Reach is completed. Okay. So it falls to the exec's office, the council, a department, the sheriff, where?
well, I think it probably, so I guess what we've envisioned as a data work group is that we then will be looking at the recommendation the data work group came up with to essentially take these recommendations from Village Reach, and particularly emphasizing the first one, recommend to this committee and to the Behavioral Health Committee that they encourage or strongly recommend to the executive's office that this initial recommendation about designating an operational role be developed and funded, and with sufficient authority and I guess to some extent autonomy, that it can begin to act in a meaningful way to bring all of the various stakeholders with access to and generation of data together to begin to work on the subsequent recommendations.
Okay,
And then if it involves funding, I suppose the council may get involved.
So a letter will be drafted by someone in this committee to be presented and voted on by the entire IPRTF body.
We've drafted a recommendation. That's
Okay.
what Raylene had put up initially on her screen.
Okay, and we're voting. Okay, great. Thank you.
So are you going to share that document or?
I can, give me a second because I think I took it off, moved to another one, came back to that one. I'm really good at
I've actually got it up on my screen as well. I could. Share it.
Okay, I'm gonna let you share that.
Okay,
Then I don't have to bounce around here.
now I have to find it myself. Here it is.
So these, what Dean is going to put up are the recommendations from the data work group, which we are hoping that the Legal and Justice Committee would accept and approve, at which point, to answer your question, Maya, it goes to the Behavioral Health Committee with the similar request, and then the two committees would send it to the IPRTF to act upon.
You
So
wanna
you-
scroll
you-
down
you-
a little bit, Dean?
You want me to walk through the recommendation here?
I think if you're asking for a vote from this committee, they have to have a moment to digest it.
Right.
Mhm.
So probably summarizing and then allowing them all to review it.
Really,
Mhm.
Jill here. I just want to let everyone know I've emailed these documents to you. So if you don't want to look at them on the screen, they should be in your email as well.
Does that help by my enlarging it?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Mhm. So there are three major bullets in our recommendations. Although it looks long, it's mostly support.
Stephen?
I think I've mentioned this in the past. I certainly like the emphasis on the autonomy of this position. I don't think empowered to engage meaningfully says as much as I would like to see. I think a lot of this has to do with the data being gathered in community partners.
Mhm.
And I've advocated and would again advocate for a very rapid revision of funding contracts that the department may have with community partners that requires their uh, uh, coordination with this position once it's established, so that this person has a little bit of clout and enforcement authority, as well as freedom to act. I don't know if that means this proposal, if we're gonna vote on it, should be amended in any way. I'm just suggesting that as a piece of establishing
Mhm.
really effective coordination role.
I agree with that, because there are people that will have access to records in law enforcement that aren't gonna have certain access to records in other departments.
Mhm.
Or if there's crossover between mental health and medical stuff, we have to seal stuff, we can't share that. So sometimes there's information that, that there's concerns about the individual and the position, and their role on whether or not they're going to gain the access they need to be able to do this cross system data integration.
That's why this is such an important role and position. Obviously, I'm no expert. At the same time, other communities have developed ways of this, and it's by de-identification of the individuals. And so what has to happen is that the data sharing system that we create has to come up with a unique identifier that can be used by every agency or site that is contributing data that is consistent. And that's part of the need for the full-time person who will be leading this process to have the authority and autonomy to help create this, and also the importance of the community getting the individual groups that are working with to say, we are committed to doing this. I mean, it's not going to happen if that commitment isn't there. And it's not just outside contracted agencies, the individual police agencies in Bellingham, Blaine, etc., don't have funding currently to get the computerized upgrades that are needed. And if no one has the commitment, it's not going to happen. So this is a pretty large issue.
Thank you, Bertie. So I guess my question is, do we have a motion? Do we have a second? And then is there other discussion if you're asking us to vote on this today?
I'm willing to move that this be accepted as a general recommendation. I don't know if there's a way that it can be accepted with accepting the principles so that it can move forward without it being restricted to the actual language. And I don't know if that's possible, so I'll.
Bill, can you provide us some clarification on that?
I think probably the closest we're gonna get would be a motion to recommend approval of the data group's recommendations with the understanding that minor changes may come forward through other committees.
Mm-hmm.
How's that?
Sounds good. Is there a second?
I don't think Jill can make a motion,
Oh,
so
sorry.
Made the motion.
I will move that.
You're going to move that, Stephen? Okay, and then Bertie seconds it. Is there any discussion?
I would just add that I think this whole thing about data sharing agreements and non-funded independent governmental entities like the municipalities and so forth, that coordination work needs to start right away in the data work.
Mhm.
Probably
Mhm.
already is, but I'll just
Mhm.
say the obvious.
Mhm.
Thank you, Stephen. Maya?
Sorry, I'm just reading this for the first time, but I'm looking at numbers.
Oh, we apologize for that.
Number 3, which talks, bullet point 1 says county department leadership reprioritize existing staff efforts to focus on reporting indicators identified in the plan as requiring minimal effort. I just can't make sense of that sentence.
I think what was the intent was that for those areas where we do have data and it would not require a lot of effort to create actual reports. For example, information on jail bookings and the lengths of stay and those kinds of things where data are fairly readily available. And we just need to look at how do we begin to make those more accessible to
Okay.
the broader community and the public.
That makes sense to me. I think this phrasing is does not express that. So that would be my only concern, but like it could use some editing. I don't.
Thank you, Maya. Wendy?
Two things real quick. One, Maya, part of this is because there is a person in the county IT department who has worked pretty extensively with the jail database. but unfortunately, they don't have the people in IT to be able to release him to focus on that. So I think that they were trying to incorporate that.
Yeah,
The
I mean,
second,
we have a couple of IT folks that we work closely with our case management system
Mhm.
who barely have capacity to help us like cobble together our need for custom reports or like sort through just literal problems with I mean, they
Yeah.
do their best, but like we touch so infrequently that like we miss things and we're not using it very efficiently. So I totally understand that IT is understaffed and like I believe that, and then probably Eric could say the same, that our different case management systems could probably offer data, but like no one inter-office in my office has the capacity to do that and IT doesn't. So I fully agree with that. And I don't, yeah. So
well, and that's really why that got included in there, is because, and of course, right now, it's going to be more difficult because the funding challenge everybody's having. And so, but they've got folks who have the ability to do it, but you put your finger on it and they don't have the capacity. And evidently Perry's been having difficulty in finding qualified people to come to work. So that might be salary, I don't know. The other thing real quick, and then I'll shut up. I started doing some research on studies that had been done in academia, tracking people between behavioral health and jails. Part of it is to find out the results, but a big part of it is what was the structure of the study that allowed them to cross over the confidentiality issues that we're looking at. And so I'm starting to get some of that pulled together, because some of them, they don't explain it in real detail to the first documents I'm getting it. So I'm having to kind of backtrack it. But there are large areas, including one of the biggest ones came out of Chicago. But the advantage was that both of them, the mental health stuff and the jail stuff, was already being reported to a central place so that they could backtrack it that way. But if I can find, I can't believe that nobody's come up with a reasonable, logical, legal way of being able to cross information like that. So I'm looking at that, and after next week, I'll have some more time. I have lots of people in my house redoing things. So
So Raylene, I'm wondering, Stephen, if I could just jump ahead of you, because I've got to leave for another commitment. But I think, we have sort of two levels of work that need to be done. One of them is more technical and, sort of working out the logistics of, how data systems can be used to draw information out and aggregate it and so forth. The level of the position that's being described here is much more a systematic level of work in terms of how to get various organizations to begin discussing common definitions, how to work through data sharing agreement issues, and those sorts of things. And so it's sort of a role for many different people who are already doing bits and pieces of that technical work, but also a coordinating and managing role around getting the whole enterprise underway. And I apologize, I've got to leave, but I
Dean,
trust
could I grab
everybody
you
else will carry on.
for 30 more seconds? Because I'm thinking we've identified a nest of issues and sort of a tiering of issues. And I'm wondering if it would be valuable to have me amend my motion simply to recommend the designation and moving forward on that single position. Because what the scope of work of that and what the authority would be, if you leave all these IT people to decide what they're able to do, you know what the answer is going to be.
Right.
A, it's going to be different, and B, it's not going to be enough. So let's get that person rolling, the creation of that position rolling, and then figure out some of these other questions and how we want to give that person a club as well as a carrot, a stick as well as a carrot. That would be my suggestion. And I'd offer to amend the motion in that singular way.
I'll leave it to you all to work through these details.
If
And I'll-
you amend it, Stephen, I will second the amended motion. I think just real quickly, because I know we're over time for everybody, that was the urgency that our data work group was feeling, which is why we didn't feel comfortable leaving it till the end of September. We wanted to say, you've got to do this right with one person who is in charge of this complex project.
I need to hear what the amendment is so that we can vote, because I also have to leave.
Well,
What is the amendment?
I would amend the motion that the committee recommend to the task force and to the Behavioral Health Committee the adoption and implementation as soon as possible of designating a single full-time position to coordinate the scope of work in the Village Reach report.
Does that mean you're asking this letter, that this data group recommendation, basically that we vote on it through number 1 and just
Yeah.
ignore numbers 2 and 3?
For
Okay.
the moment, yes.
Okay, great. I would second.
So with that being said, we'll take a vote and show of hands for those 4.
I'm voting in place of the sheriff.
Okay, for those, lower your hands so we can have those against. Right. And Jake, I appreciate that. So we have 2 against, 2 for. I would like to add a little caveat, because I think it passes with the amount we have. I'm for this with the concern that I can't afford to cut anything from my budget. And as a
No.
department head, I think that this is an important, valuable tool that would be beneficial. But I have concerns of severe budget concerns with the county, and that I need to make sure that my staff is covered.
Raylene, can I clarify the vote, please? I see Jake voted against, and you said there was one other person.
That
Ms.
was me, and I would
Okay.
echo, I mean, my echo was gonna be what Raylene said, and I would like some additional time to review materials.
Thank you. I just needed to clarify it for the record.
I agree with that as well. I just feel rushed into, like, this is the
Yeah,
first
I
time I'm seeing
know.
this, and I'm just kind of overwhelmed with what I'm putting my name to push forward. That's all. So
Well, if I could say one final thing from the data subcommittee, we don't think there's any way that the current county budget can do any of this, and so what we really need is to label it and say this justice implementation project is written to include evidence-based performance measurement. And if we're going to do that, then it takes this kind of funding and have that community discussion. I think there's people in the community now that feel the county is dragging its feet and kind of pulling the wool over their eyes, and we need to get it out in the public and say, this is what it will take. So we could even add a caveat to these that we understand current budgeting in no way is adequate, but let's call the question, this is what it will take if we're going to do this.
Thank you for that clarification, Bertie, and I appreciate everybody's input on this matter. We need to wrap up today
I
because
know.
we have
Yep.
gone over time. But I thought it was important to at least provide this. So do we have any outside participants, public comment?
We have one attendee today via Zoom. If you'd like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand now. No hands are raised.
Okay, then with that being said, thank you all for attending and assisting, and we'll call this meeting adjourned. It's 12:39 on July 8th.